Finally, near the end of that week, news came at last. A raven from White Harbor. Daenerys and Robb's forces had passed through the countryside near Winterfell, rallying what men they could, and marched on toward Castle Black. Skirmishes had been reported with wildling scouts south of the wall. The letter gave no details of dragons or White Walkers, only that the combined host was pressing on and that the watch was desperate. The letter was signed in Robb's hand, with a brief note from Daenerys appended. "We go to face the cold winds. Pray for us." Missandei received the news with quiet resolution. She immediately prepared to depart. Ned arranged an escort for her to White Harbor by ship, instructing the captain of a Baratheon-loyal vessel to ensure her party's safe passage. The sea route would take time, but likely less than the roads, which were reportedly filling with bandits or leftover Lannister loyalists. As a final courtesy, Ned wrote a letter in the king's name, urging the Lord of White Harbor to guide Missandei's party north to the wall. The next morning, Missandei and her people sailed on the tide, leaving King's Landing behind. In the uneasy calm that followed, Ned turned his attention back to King's Landing's day-to-day troubles. Despite the precarious situation, a small measure of normalcy had returned to the city. Shops reopened, mummers performed in the squares. But the memory of war and famine lingered. Many small folk wore hollow expressions. Meanwhile, rumors abounded that if Tywin Lannister triumphed in the west, he would retake the capital in a bloodbath. Others whispered that Daenerys' dragons would torch King's Landing if Stannis refused to yield. Every day, new rumors emerged. At length, a dispatch arrived from Stannis' host. They had clashed with Lannister forces near Harrenhal's northern road. The battle was inconclusive, with losses on both sides. Tywin had retreated behind Harrenhal's blackened walls, while Stannis set about besieging him. The letter, penned by Stannis' own hand, reeked of frustration. Harrenhal was massive, with a cursed history, and Tywin's men had plenty of supplies. With winter creeping in, maintaining a siege grew more difficult by the day. Stannis urged Ned to send more men or resources if possible, warning that Tywin might slip away to ravage the Riverlands again. Ned felt torn. King's Landing needed a garrison, the roads north needed a stable presence to keep them open for supply lines, and the city's resources were barely enough to feed its own population, let alone fueling a siege at Harrenhal. After consulting with Davos and Lord Yohn Royce, he agreed to gather what extra men they could, perhaps 1,000, and send them west under the Vale banner, hoping that might tip the balance. Another wave of ravens went out, pleading for support from the Tullys or the Tyrells. Each day that Tywin was allowed to remain a threat was a day that the realm's war could reignite in full. Weeks bled into months. Snow fell in the Crownlands, a rare sight, frosting the red rooftops of King's Landing. The city had never looked so pale, as though winter's breath had come early. Streets became slippery with slush, and the Blackwater rush carried chunks of ice. Some small folk took it as a sign. A harsh winter was descending, and all the land would suffer if the wars did not end soon. No direct word arrived from the north, though hushed rumors filtered in. Some travelers claimed to have seen a black dragon wheeling in the sky near the Gift. Others spoke of entire villages beyond the wall laid to waste, the dead left frozen in grotesque poses. The wildlings advanced in large numbers, but Daenerys' dragons supposedly struck terror into them, causing some to scatter. Still, no one could confirm if the others themselves had been engaged in open battle. Anxiety gnawed at Ned. He wrote letter after letter to the Watch, to Robb, to Daenerys, but not a single raven returned with their seal. Possibly the storms had disrupted the birds, or the rookeries had been overrun. His only recourse was to wait. In King's Landing, that wait became a slow torment. The small council, such as it was, tried to keep hope alive. Davos was a calming presence, though Ned could see the Onion Knight's worry etched into every line of his face. Lord Yohn Royce spent his days drilling the city guard, determined that if Tywin tried a lightning strike, the capital would be ready. Maester Pylus worked tirelessly with the city's healers to ward off the sicknesses that cold weather often brought. They even distributed a measure of the new supplies Missandei's group had left behind, food from Essos, blankets, herbs. It helped keep the small folk from starving in the worst pockets of the city. Then, one evening, a messenger arrived bearing a battered sigil of House Tully, half torn away. The man was near collapse, having ridden hard from the Riverlands, braving snows and bandits. He carried a sealed message from Edmure Tully at Riverrun. It bore grim tidings. Tywin Lannister has broken free of Harrenhal. Stannis' siege was undermined by freezing rains. Tywin seized a moment of weakness, slipped his men out at night, and cut a path through the Tully lines. He heads south, possibly for King's Landing or the Reach. Stannis pursues, but the weather hampers both sides. The war continues. Ned read the words in dismay. Harrenhal's curse. Many said, doomed any who tried to hold it. Now Tywin was free, and no one was certain of his next move. Would he strike at the capital, or attempt to link up with any surviving Lannister loyalists near the Westerlands? Stannis would chase him, but the battered remains of both armies trudged through snow-laden roads. Ned realized the city might again face siege, with the newly mustered city guard and a fraction of the forces that had once defended it. The threat of new bloodshed lurked at the doorstep. Before the city could even absorb that news, a second messenger arrived, this one from the Vale. The mountain clans in the foothills were rising in raids, possibly funded by Lannister gold. The Vale Knights traveling outside the city might have to return home to protect their lands. Lord Yohn Royce bristled with frustration. We cannot be everywhere at once, he fumed to Ned. If the clans threaten our villages, the Vale Lords will demand we defend them. That leaves King's Landing undermanned. Ned felt the weight of hopelessness creeping in. We must do what we can to hold the city. Even a small garrison might deter Tywin if his forces are exhausted. If the Vale Knights must return, they must. We can't let the Vale fall into chaos. Perhaps the men from the Reach might finally stir, if they see Tywin marauding. Royce grunted. Might. The Tyrells watch carefully, I suspect, waiting for the perfect moment to choose a side that guarantees victory with minimal cost. Such is politics. He pounded a fist on the table. What of your letters to Lady Olenna? Ned rubbed his temples. No reply. Either it never reached her, or she chooses to ignore it. So the city's defenders prepared as best they could, stockpiling scraps of food and reinforcing the gates. Ned had the gold cloaks triple-check the walls for cracks or weaknesses. Blacksmiths worked around the clock forging arrowheads. The memory of Wildfire from the Battle of the Blackwater haunted many, but that store was largely destroyed or hidden by Tyrion Lannister once, and no one had found additional caches. Perhaps that was a mercy. Ned did not wish to see King's Landing burn in green flame yet again. Days dragged on in anxious quiet, until a frigid dawn brought a flash of something new. Horns at the city's gates, heralding the arrival of a column of wagons escorted by men in cloaks bearing the sigil of Highgarden. Ned, Davos, and Royce rushed out to see the commotion. There in the frosty courtyard stood several hundred men bearing the golden rose of House Tyrell. At their head, Ser Garland Tyrell, a broad-shouldered knight wearing a fine green cloak, accompanied by a small retinue that included a woman of advanced years perched on a litter, flanked by younger attendants. Lady Olenna, the Queen of Thorns, had come in person. Ned approached, controlling his surprise. Ser Garland, he greeted. We had not expected to see House Tyrell in King's Landing unannounced. Garland Tyrell bowed formally. Lord Stark, we bring wagons of grain and some fresh produce from the last harvest in the Mander Valley. It was Lady Olenna's wish that we not see the capital starve in these trying times. Lady Olenna snapped her fan shut, peering at Ned with piercing blue eyes. Are we going to stand in the cold all day? I'm half frozen and my joints ache. Point me to some place warm, boy, and we can talk about my dear Mace's concerns with your new king. Ned almost smiled despite the tension. He bowed. Of course, my lady. The Red Keep is at your disposal. We welcome your generosity. Inside, relief blossomed. Food from the Reach would stave off famine for at least a while, and perhaps, just perhaps, this signaled that House Tyrell was ready to stand against Tywin Lannister. They ushered Lady Olenna and her retinue into the keep, stabling horses and storing wagons. In the solar, a roaring fire crackled, providing the warmth she sought. Ned, Davos and Royce took seats across from Olenna and Ser Garland, who settled on plush chairs. She sipped a cup of spiced wine, scowling at its taste as though it offended her refined senses. At last, Lady Olenna spoke, her voice sharp. "I have come because we can no longer abide this endless war that is burning our fields and draining the realm's coin. The Lannisters are as cunning as ever, but with that dreadful boy king dead and the lioness Cersei put to the axe, we suspect Tywin's days are numbered. My dear Mace Tyrell dithers as usual, but I persuaded him that if we do not intervene, we risk Tywin stirring up more chaos. So here we are. We bring food, goodwill, and perhaps more, if the new king on the Iron Throne shows proper courtesy." Ned inclined his head. "King Stannis is grateful. He is currently in the field, pursuing Tywin in the Riverlands, but I serve as hand in his stead." "What do you seek in return, my lady?" She waved a dismissive hand. "A stable realm, an end to Tywin's mischief, and a king who won't bankrupt the Reach. We prefer not to see a Targaryen on the throne again, not after the madness we endured, but I hear she's gallivanting about in the north anyway, so that's a future concern. For now, if King Stannis acknowledges House Tyrell's rights, shows courtesy to my granddaughter Marjorie, and perhaps grants certain boons to Highgarden, we will commit our armies to finishing Tywin once and for all. Then maybe the realm can breathe easy." Ned nodded. "I believe King Stannis will be amenable. He needs allies, and your support could turn the tide swiftly. If House Tyrell musters its full strength, Tywin cannot stand against you in the field." Garland Tyrell spoke up. "Precisely. We have forces enough to relieve Stannis's men near Harrenhal or wherever Tywin flees. But we must know, do you trust Stannis to keep his word? The Reach is not eager to trade one tyrant for another." Davos answered quietly, "Stannis Baratheon is stern, but he values justice. He has no love for tyranny, and he cannot afford to alienate you. With your help, we can bring Tywin to heel, then focus on the threat in the north. That is where the real danger lies." Lady Olenna eyed Davos with interest. "Ah, the Onion Knight. Yes, I've heard tales of you. If you vouch for Stannis's honor, I suppose I can trust that more than some silver-tongued courtier. Very well. In a fortnight, my main force will move north from the Reach. We shall smash the Lion's last stand, assuming the weather does not hamper us too much." Ned breathed a silent prayer of thanks to the old gods. At last, a powerful ally had emerged, which might mean a swift end to the Lannister cause. Tywin, beset from multiple sides, could be forced to surrender or face annihilation. "Your ladyship, you have the gratitude of the crown. Will write to King Stannis at once. You are welcome to remain in the city or head west as you see fit." With that, the seeds of a new alliance blossomed. Lady Olenna and Ser Garland declared they would remain in the capital just a few days to rest and glean more information. Then they would depart to muster the main Tyrell host. Ned arranged comfortable quarters for them, eager to keep them content. The wagons of food were distributed among the city's granaries, quieting the hunger and fear among the small folk. A hush of hope spread through King's Landing. Perhaps the war in the south would end soon. Yet Ned's thoughts strayed north. He knew that even if Tywin were destroyed and the realm unified under Stannis, with the Tyrells' help, the White Walkers might still triumph if Daenerys, Robb, and the Night's Watch could not hold the line. A sense of urgency plagued him daily. Winter's grip tightened. Ice coated the city's fountains, and snow dusted the cobblestones. Then, one bright morning, a frantic knocking roused Ned from his bedchamber. He opened the door to find a pale young squire who stammered, "Lord Stark, come quickly. Someone has arrived at the gates. They say they bear news from the far north." Ned barely took time to don his cloak before hurrying out, heart pounding. The city's main gate was a swirl of activity when he arrived. Soldiers parted to reveal an emaciated man hunched in furs, leaning on a spear for support. His breath came in ragged puffs, and he looked near collapse. The Stark sigil was scrawled on his cloak, half frozen with frost. When Ned knelt by him, the man's eyes flicked open. "My lord, from Castle Black, from King Robb and the Queen of Dragons," he coughed, spitting flecks of blood. The wildlings, tens of thousands. The watch battered, the White Walkers in the woods. He begs for supplies and men. The dead, so many dead. Ned felt the blood drain from his face. Is Robb alive? Is Daenerys? The messenger coughed harder, nodding faintly. Aye. Last I saw, they held the wall. The dragons burned the whites by the hundreds. But Mance Raider's host, unstoppable. They need help. They need Southern lords, quickly. His voice trailed off. The poor man's eyes rolled back, and a maester rushed forward to tend him. Ned's stomach churned. The situation was dire if the combined might of dragons, unsullied, and northern bannermen could barely hold back the wildlings and the whites. The final war was truly upon them. He rose, turning to the assembled guards. Find Lord Davos, Lord Royce, and the Tyrells. We must gather at once. The fate of the realm hinges on the north, and we cannot fail them. As men ran to do his bidding, Ned looked beyond the gate to the dusty road leading north. I must do everything in my power, he thought. Stannis fights Tywin in the west. The Tyrells muster their armies. But if the north falls now, no victory here will matter. The entire kingdom could be devoured by the army of the dead. The plan formed in his mind as swiftly as a desperate flame. He would request Lady Olenna to send part of her host north as soon as they mustered. He would recall any spare men from King's Landing, perhaps even ride out himself if the capital seemed secure enough. Let Tywin be Stannis's problem. Ned's duty might be to stand with his son on the wall. Summoning all his courage, he strode back into the city, calling for scribes to pen new ravens. The North needed them, the realm needed them, and Ned Stark, once a reluctant hand, would not let the living fail. He could almost hear the wind from the far north, that chill whisper of doom. The White Walkers had awakened. Now it would take every house, every alliance, and every measure of courage to hold them at bay. Duty demanded that the living stand as one, or fall to the darkness forever. And so Ned Stark prepared for what might be the final trial of his life, to unify the realm in its darkest hour and ride into the biting cold to defend not just a kingdom or a throne, but all of humanity from winter's unending wrath.